Hi, Peter here. Welcome and thank you for joining us for our 13th virtual reading. We have been doing this since March. I can't believe it. We can't wait to see you in person, but until then, we love seeing you at these readings and at the writings that we're doing. I'd like to thank my Murphy Writing colleagues, Stephanie Colley and Taylor Coyle, who do all of the magic that makes this happen. I'd also like to thank tonight's reader, Dorianne Laux. Her newest book, Only as the Day is Long, was a finalist for this year's Pulitzer Prize. We're thrilled and grateful that Dorianne will be reading for us tonight, and you'll hear from her in a moment. If you missed any of our previous readings and would like to catch up with them or re-see them, go to our Murphy Writing YouTube page. Go to YouTube, that's it. Click in Murphy Writing and it'll come up. And Stephanie will put that link in the chat room, so you can just bookmark it if you like. And if you want to do some writing, every day, Monday to Friday, we have put new writing prompts on a Canvas website. Go to murphywriting.com, you can register for it, it's free, and it'll be a new prompt with a witty quote, and you can write a poem, prose, poetry, or fiction or nonfiction, and you can even post it for comments by other people. And twice a week, Mondays at 4 and Wednesdays at 7, we have a write-in together where we just get together, we look at each other for 2 minutes, and we write quietly, and at the end of that, we share for a few minutes. So you're welcome to join us for all of these. We'll get started in a moment, but I'd just like to announce our next week, we'll be hosting our next special reader, Yusuf Kominaka, another Pulitzer Prize winner. So we're very grateful that Yusuf will be with us next week. All right, so here's how we get started. If you'd like to respond to anything that Dorianne writes, at the bottom of your Zoom screen is a reaction button, and you can either clap your hand like that, or you can put a thumbs up, or you can just do it in the traditional way, if you're not familiar with Zoom. Let me just say a few things about Dorianne. Dorianne Laux's sixth collection, Only as the Day is Long, New and Selected Poems, as I mentioned, was just named a finalist for the 2020 Pulitzer Prize for Poetry. Her book before that, The Book of Men, was awarded the Patterson Prize. She's got a lot of prizes here. The fourth book of poems, Facts About the Moon, won the Oregon Book Award and was shortlisted for the Lenore Marshall Poetry Prize. Dorianne is also the author of Awake, What We Carry, which was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award, Smoke, as well as a small press edition, The Book of Women. She is also the co-author of the celebrated text, The Poet's Companion, A Guide to the Pleasures of Writing Poetry. Please join me in welcoming Dorianne Laux. We're so happy that you're here.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so wonderful to, look out and see all these people that I recognize. Frank Beltrano, who is it? Oh, Veronica Bolin. Are you Heather's mom? Yes, you are. Who was it that I saw here? I saw Denise was here somewhere. Who else did I see? Oh, Bloomberg. Some people just have first names, so I don't know if I know them or not. But Denise, there's Denise, but her picture is not up. Or her, and Heather, of course, Heather. So thank you all for being here. And I thought I would do a reading. Of course, my book is really largely about the new poems about my mother and her, recent death. But I want to read this newer poem that I wrote about my mother. Well, actually, this one's the older poem. I have another newer poem that I wrote about her that I'll read. But this comes from one of my prior books. And my mother was an emergency room nurse. And I've been reading this poem first at my readings because of the COVID and how we all have learned to appreciate nurses and doctors. And I'm trying to get this light out of my eyes. It looks like I'm staring at you with laser beams. This, is that better? No, it still has, it's the windows. It's the windows that are doing it. But, now we see how these nurses and doctors are really heroes. And so this is something that they've been experiencing quite a bit. And my mother experienced it quite a bit as an emergency room nurse. And so this is called Her First. Who remembers when she told me, the year, what actually happened, which hospital, my mother, the man who died in her arms, gone from memory, only that he was her first, only my mother in her uniform, white, unblemished, or stippled with blood, and his eyes, the hand she held as he held on, long enough to say the wordless thing that needed saying, her eyes answering, then speaking aloud the only words that could be said. It's all right. I'm here. Okay. Her telling me how she held on, never looked away, ushered his soul into the unknown with a handful of words, a direct gaze, almost visible, almost a color, a cone of warmer air shimmering between them in the bleach-scented room, a thin stream of music blushing through the speakers in the hallways outside the open door. The slick, canted floor, they would gurney him down on tiny rubber wheels that oiled, spun freely, easily, as they turned the corner toward the morgue. The institutional gray walls, not, thank God, the last color he would see, but the sea blue corona of her eyes. Irises spiked with amber, flecked with green, fully open and seeing him. Whoever he was, whoever he had harmed or helped, loved or failed to love, finally, mercifully, of no importance now, as she watched over the last minutes of his anonymous life. His large death fluttering down under the soft black wings of his lashes as he left this sweet, brief world and entered into the next, hand in hand with a godless woman who would always remember him, his rust-colored eyes saying goodbye to her, to this life, in a time I remember now. So that's for my mother, who did this heroic work, and all of the nurses and doctors that continue to do it. And so I thought I would pretty much dedicate this reading to my mother and read the poems about her in my book. She was always my muse. And so I've written many poems about her over the years. And this is one that comes from the 20 new poems about her. And it's called My Mother's Colander. And I posted this poem on Facebook one day. It had been published somewhere, and so I posted it. I got so many responses from this poem because people remember their mother's colander. It's I had no idea, that this was a treasured item among so many people. My mother's colander. Holes in the shape of stars, punched in gray tin, dented, cheap, beaten by each of her children with a wooden spoon. Noodle catcher, spaghetti stopper, pouring cloudy rain into the sink, swirling counterclockwise down the drain, starch slime on the backside, caught in the piercings. Scrubbed for 60 years, packed and unpacked, the baby's helmet during the Cold War, the sinking ship in the bathtub, little boat of holes. Dirt scooped in with a plastic shovel, sifted to make cakes and castles, wrestled from each other's hands, its tin feet bent and rebent. Bowl daylight fell through onto freckled faces, noon stars on the pavement, the universe we circled, aiming jagged stones, rung bells it caught and held. And I know it's Father's Day, but I'm going to read this poem for my mother for Mother's Day. And my mother had a stroke many, many years ago, and so I cared for her during that time. She recovered really completely from that stroke, and so she was just fine for the rest of her life. Mother's Day. I passed through the narrow hills of my mother's hips one cold morning and never looked back until now, clipping her tough toenails, sitting on the bed's edge, combing out the tuft of hair at the crown where it ratted up while she slept, her thumbs locked into fists, a gesture as old as she is, her blanched knees fallen together beneath a blue nightgown. The stroke took whole pages of words, random years torn from the calendar, the names of roses leaning over her driveway, cadenza, Great Western, American Beauty. She can't think, can't drink her morning tea, do her crossword puzzle in ink. She's afraid of everything. The sound of the front door opening, light falling through the blinds, pulls her legs up so the bright bars won't touch her feet. I help her with the buttons on her sweater. She looks hard at me and says the word sleeve. Exactly, I tell her, and her face relaxes for the first time in weeks. I lie down next to her on the flowered sheets and tell her a story about the day she was born, head first into a hard world. The Great Depression, shanties, Hoovervilles, railroads, and unions. I tell her about Amelia Earhart. She asks air and points to the ceiling, asks heart and points to her chest. Yes, I say. I sing Cole Porter songs. Brother, can you spare a dime? When I recite lines from Gone with the Wind, she sits up and says, potatoes. And I say, right again. I read her Sandburg, some Frost, and she closes her eyes. I say, yes, yes, and tuck her in. It's summer. She's tired. No one knows where she's been. So it was a pretty damaging stroke, and she was older, you know, I can't remember, close maybe to 65, 70, and she recovered completely just because she has such an incredible will. And this is the newer poem that I wrote about my mother, and I hope you all know what this tool is, a spirit level. How many know what a spirit level is? Raise your hand. If you don't know, it's you've seen it, you know, and it's this little rectangular piece of wood with a window in it and a bubble, and you use it to make sure something is straight. So they use it in carpentry quite a bit, right? And in that little bubble is alcohol, an air bubble, and it's trapped inside, and it moves, you know, as you move the rectangle. And then the second thing is that it has a quote from a Gary Snyder poem, and it's called The Axe Handle. And he says in that poem, when making an axe handle, the pattern is not far off, right? Because you make the axe handle with the very axe. So you can, it's in your hand what you're trying to make. So this is called spirit level. My mother was either horizontal on the couch or vertical, a plumb line from her spine to the top of her head to the ceiling that spun when she drank. Alcohol and an air bubble trapped, sealed, and fixed inside her. Her face carved from wood, a tear gliding slowly down the curve of her cheek. My mother was once a spirit in this world. Once she breathed for me, above me, beside me, behind me. Now I feel her warm breath on my neck, summer nights, peering over my shoulder as I write every poem, whispering, let me in. I let her in. I remember every time she picked me up or set me down, put me to bed or woke me from dreams. And now I see how my whole life has been a dream, one she built for me from the ground up. Her daughter, my mother, the axe, beautiful tool with which she shaped me. A house much like the one she lived in, but smaller, fewer rooms, a tiny, unusable attic, and a cluttered basement. I let her in. like she let me in. She became my carpenter, stonemason, and bricklayer, piling me up cell by cell, the blade that shaped my legs, my arms, my surveyor, my millwright. She used herself as a template, her genes tough, her organs elastic, her eyes and nose, forehead and mouth. And when her body, from which my body was made, was slipped into the hot retort, I burned too. She refused the beveled casket, the oiled mahogany box, last drawer for the dead, wanted only the fury of fire, the blue-white flames unmaking her with their licking tongues. House her grandmother built, and her grandmother before her, all of them giving what they had been given. The hardwood floors, staircases and banisters, their deepest cupboards, their heavy doors flung wide so the breeze I would be could blow through. So these mother poems are, I think, I talked with one of the judges for the Pulitzer, and that judge told me that it was the new poems that really put it over the edge, you know. And so that's always heartening for a poet to hear, right? Because you want to hear that the poems you just wrote are your best poems, you know. And so this is another one from my mother. It's called Crow. When the air conditioner comes on, it sounds for all the world like my mother, clearing her throat and then sighing. After she died, I'd shudder and look up, expecting to see her ghost. I wasn't afraid, only hopeful. To see her again, to hear her knees creak, her knuckles pop, the ash of her cigarette hiss and flare. She gargled with salt water, spit it into the sink, grabbed the phone with her claw, the back of her head sleek as a crow. My mother is a crow on the lawn, laughing with the others, flapping up on a branch, jerking and twisting her ruffed neck, looking around. I find her everywhere, her eyes staring out from aspen bark, the rivers of her hands, the horse's ankle bones. Astounding such delicacy could bear such terrible weight. And so this is probably the, centerpiece poem for my mother. And it tells you a little something about, again, the heroics sort of her life and of all mothers' lives. You know, I think if we knew what a mother did throughout her life to take care of her children and to get where she needed to go, we would write more books and movies and songs about mothers, you know. And so this is her journey. It's called Arizona. The last time I saw my mother, she was sitting on the back patio in her nightgown, a robe thrown over her shoulders, the elbows gone sheer from wear. It was 3 months before her death. She was hunched above one of the last crossword puzzles she would ever solve, her brow furrowed over a 7-letter word for tooth. I was staying at a cheap hotel, the kind where everyone stands outside their front door to smoke. A cup of hotel coffee balanced on the butt end of the air conditioner, blasting its cold fumes over the unmade bed. The outdoor speakers played Take It Easy on a loop by the time I get to Phoenix and get back. It wasn't the best visit. My sister's house was filled with dogs, half-grown kids, and piles of dirty clothes. No food in the fridge, so we went out and got tacos, enchiladas, and burritos from the Filibertos a few blocks away. A squat tub of guacamole and chips, tumblers of horchata, orange Fanta, and Mr. Pibb. 1,000 napkins. Everyone was happy while they chewed. The state of Arizona is a box of heat, wedged between Las Vegas and Albuquerque. Not a good place to be poor or get sick or die. My mother rode a train from Maine in 1953. She was just a girl, me bundled in her arms all the way to California. I've tried to imagine it. If you continue west on Route 66, it will branch upward and dump you into the spangle of Santa Monica, where I used to live. And then you can drive Highway 1 almost all the way up the Redwood Coast to Mendocino. I used to do that. I probably spent more time in my car than any house I lived in. My mother never knew where I was. She'd call and leave a message. "This is your mother," as if I might not recognize her voice. "And I'm just wondering where you are in these United States." She used to make me laugh. The whole family was funny as hell once. Dinner time was like a green room full of stand-up comics. That day, sitting with them over spilled salsa, I saw the damage booze and meth can do to a row of faces. The jokes were tired, and the windows behind them filled with hot white sky, plain as day. When I got back to the hotel, it was getting dark, but it had cooled off, so I took a walk around the parking lot. Strangers leaned out over their second-floor balconies and shouted down at their friends, traipsing away in thin hotel towels toward the tepid blue pool. The moon was up, struggling to unsnag itself from the thorny crowns of the honey locusts, the stunted curbside pines. I left my tall mother on the couch where she was sleeping, flat on her back, her robe now a blanket, her rainbow-striped socks sticking out like the bad witch beneath the house in The Wizard of Oz. But she was not a bad witch, nor was she Glinda. That was my mother's brother's wife's name. We called her the bad witch behind her back. My mother still wore her wedding ring, even after she remarried. Why spend good money on a new one when she liked this one perfectly well? She always touched it like a talisman, fretted it around her bony finger. 3 kinds of braided gold, white, rose, and yellow. By the end, the only thing keeping it from slipping off was her arthritic knuckle. I don't know what my sister did with it after she died. I wonder if all that gold was melted down in a crucible, the colors mixing, a muddy nugget. I do know that Route 66, in addition to being called the Will Rogers Highway and the Main Street of America, was also known as the Mother Road, from John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. My mother looked like a woman Walker Evans might have photographed, with her dark, wavy hair, wide forehead, and high cheekbones, one veined hand clutching her sweater at the collar, her face a map of every place she'd been, every floor she scrubbed, every book she'd read, every ungrateful child she birthed that lived or died, every hungry, upturned mouth she fed, every beer she drank, every unslept night, every cigarette, every song gone out of her, every failure. Severe, you might say. She always looked slightly haughty, glamorous, and famished. I saw all the cars parked in that lot and wanted to hotwire one with a good radio, drive away, keep driving until the ocean stopped me, then hairpin up the coast and arrive like an orphan at Canada's front door. If I'd known I'd never see my mother again, I wouldn't have done much different. I might have woken her, taken her tarnished shoulders in my arms, rocked her like a child. As it was, I bent over her and kissed her on the temple, a curl of her hair caught for a moment in the corner of my lips. This is my mother, I thought, her brain sleeping beneath her skull, her heart sluggish but still beating, her body my first house, the dark horse I rode in on. So I have no idea if I'm up to my time limit or if I should continue reading. It's very difficult when I can't hear any of you. I can see your little clapping hand.
Yeah. Dorianne, why don't you read one more poem?
One more?
Yep.
Okay. This is one that I've been ending readings with quite a bit. And I wrote it before, you know, the Rona descended and all the protests began in the streets over George Floyd. So I was already feeling pretty helpless. And then that came along and I think I was feeling even more helpless. But then I ended up writing this kind of oddly hopeful poem. And so maybe you'll like it. It's called In Any Event. If we are fractured like stars, bred to shine in every direction, through any dimension, billions of years since and hence. I shall not lament the human, not yet. There is something more to come. Our hearts a gold mine, not yet plumbed, an uncharted sea. Nothing is gone forever. If we came from dust and will return to dust, then we can find our way into anything. What we are capable of is not yet known, and I praise us now in advance. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorianne. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who's been listening and coming to these. We appreciate that. We hope that you enjoyed tonight. And we hope to see you next Friday night when Yusuf Komunyaku will be reading. Usually when we conclude these programs, we put a link to Pass the Hat to help support them because we're not charging, we're not bringing in much revenue. But we decided for the next few whiles that we're not going to accept money for ourselves, but we're recommending that instead you contribute to one of the organizations we're suggesting. This week, we're suggesting contributions to Kave Kanam, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting and promoting African-American poets. So look for the link on your way out. And if you have some extra money and would like to help support that, that would be wonderful. There's the link. And again, we want to thank you for coming and listening. I'd like to thank Dorianne. It was just really a very moving, intimate reading, despite the fact that we're on Zoom. It was very intimate for me. So thank you all.